Donald Trump has a warning for the Republican National Committee. He says, watch out, the system is crooked. And he says his supporters aren't happy. Sean Spicer is the chief strategist and communications director for the Republican National Committee. Sean, thank you for coming on today.
You bet. Good afternoon.
So I don't mean to catch you here, but I'm just going to play a clip of what you said to me on this same show last February. Have a listen. Do you believe you'll have an uncontested candidate for the Republican nomination by the time you get around to the convention?
I do. Yes, okay. I do believe that, and I think that we'll have a much better. Like I said, 60% of the delegates. We need 1,237 to take our nomination. More voters are going to have an opportunity to be involved in this process than ever before, and I think come the end of March, you'll hopefully start to see the emergence of a presumptive nominee. But I think we're pretty confident that by mid-April, you'll have an idea of who our nominee is going to be.
All right, so we're 2 months later, almost to the day. You still confident you're going to have a nominee uncontested in time for the convention in July?
Well, clearly it's still possible. I think one part that I was right about is more voters did participate in this process than ever before. The turnout has been spectacular. We've had record numbers of participation in almost every state. But as we get more and more contests under our belt, we've got a big prize in New York coming up with 95 delegates. It's becoming apparent that there's a greater possibility of an open convention. On the last day of voting, June 7th, you're going to have 303 delegates, 172 in California alone. That means that we're going to definitely go to June 7th before we have an answer to the question you're asking. But I think that as each contest goes by, the likelihood that it is an open convention and that no one has the bound 1,237 delegates necessary to take the nomination does clearly get greater.
You heard, I'm sure, criticism from the Trump campaign after Colorado, calling it a rigged vote. You had the Trump strategist Paul Manafort calling them Cruz's tactics, Gestapo tactics. We just had Stephen Miller of the Trump campaign on here a few minutes ago saying that the process there was undemocratic. What's your response?
Well, I mean, you pointed it out that all of these states and territories submitted plans last year as to how they would allocate their delegates and the selection process that would occur. Those plans were made available to every campaign starting last year. So candidates and campaigns shouldn't be surprised as how the either allocation or the of those allocated delegates works. It's up to them to both win a state and then go in and fight to have their slate or their delegates get elected. But there's two differences. Number one, in states where a candidate has won the delegates, then it comes down to a person that gets selected. If that person that's selected is still bound by whatever those state rules are. So if Trump wins a delegate in a state, and then someone runs for that slot, the selection of that, regardless of who that person supports, that they are bound to vote for the candidate that was allocated it. In Colorado, they've talked about having a convention since last year. Everyone's known that. That's how they chose to do it. Again, the process by which our party's engaging in right now is something that we've been engaging in for over a century in terms of each state deciding how they're going to select their delegates.
So let me ask you this, because you've heard the criticism here you have after losing Colorado from Donald Trump, making threats in effect about how his supporters will react. You've just said that there's a greater possibility of having a contested convention, and there are scenarios there where delegates on the second ballot, they change candidates. You know just how fervent many of Donald Trump supporters and Ted Cruz and others, how they are. If there was something that was viewed as machinations from the outside, that the Republican Party is trying to push a mainstream candidate, is the RNC prepared for that kind of controversy at the election? How do you handle what could be some very angry voters?
Well, there's two things to point out. Number one, I think it's highly unlikely that anyone but the three individuals that are going to go to Cleveland will be nominated. But number two, and this is sort of a nuance in language, but it's important, is that it's up to the delegates. The RNC doesn't have a position. The Republican Party doesn't have a position. Our position is to run the most open and transparent process that's fair to everyone who attends it. But it's ultimately up to the elected delegates who will decide how this convention operates, what the platform looks like, and yes, who our nominee will be.
Up to the delegates. Thanks very much, Sean Spicer with the RNC. Good to have you on today.
Thank you, Jim.